Not too long ago, I finished a game called Project Cat. It is the prologue to the game that I'm reviewing today, Paper Lily. I really enjoyed Project Cat, so it seems likely that I would enjoy the game that it is the prologue for, right? Well, let's take a look at Paper Lily Chapter 1 and see if that's the case. Paper Lily Chapter 1 is a horror adventure style game developed by Leaf 6010, or 6010, I'm not sure which way it is. It was originally released in 2024 for the PC and is a free-to-play game. This is an indie game and doesn't have an official rating, but definitely would land an M rating with all of the horror themes in it. While there are definitely some connections between Project Cat in terms of the general world building, I was surprised at how disconnected the narratives were. I would say that you don't really need to have played Project Cat to enjoy Paper Lily Chapter 1. This may change in subsequent chapters, but beyond the idea of rituals sent in golden letters that connect to some kind of other world full of danger and demons, there isn't really any overlap that I noticed. Paper Lily has you controlling Lacey, a girl who is suffering from some kind of unknown condition. For some reason, she seems to attract negative attention from others, even complete strangers, for doing nothing more than existing, as is shown in one of the earliest scenes in the game. This has led to Lacey becoming withdrawn from society and is very much struggling with her situation, going as far to try a dangerous ritual in order to get rid of whatever it is that has made her life so negative. While Project Cat was a fairly contained story, Paper Lily is quite a bit longer. Lacey's story has you traveling through a number of different locations in the demon world. This creates a story that is longer and gives you more time with Lacey and the other characters you meet throughout the game. It also creates a story that is not quite as tight as the one in Project Cat. You travel through different locations, and while some connect and flow well, there are some parts that don't flow quite as smoothly. For me, that is the part between the lake and the facility. It just seems like it's kind of a weird transition there, and like we're missing something that went on in between there, and I just didn't really understand how that all worked. Paper Lily also leaves a lot of loose ends, which is due to this being Chapter 1 of the game. While it was enjoyable, you're left with far more questions than answers by the end of the game. With so many questions left unresolved, it's hard to know exactly what to think about the story when so much of it is left incomplete. Just like Project Cat, there are a number of different endings in Paper Lily. With Paper Lily though, most of these are just different ways to die, and aren't quite as varied as the different endings in Project Cat. I feel like this is because the game is larger and there isn't really a set end to Paper Lily. You basically have to make it to the point where the story will be able to connect to the next chapter. As in Project Cat, I do wish there was some way to have at least a checklist of endings that you've achieved for the game so that you know what you might be missing. The journey so far has been interesting though, and I want to know how things turn out and what answers there are to find. I just can't really comment on how satisfying the ending is, since it's more of a to be continued than an ending, which might be all the answers some people need for how satisfying this is. Paper Lily is marketed as an RPG horror game, and just like with Project Cat, I somewhat disagree with this genre classification. These games fit better as horror adventure games in my mind. The general idea is that you have to find items and then figure out how to use them to progress in the game. There aren't really a whole lot of RPG mechanisms in the game. There is not really any combat, there's no real gaining levels or getting stronger, anything like that, there's none of, so I feel like it fits much more in the adventure genre than it does in the RPG genre. Since Paper Lily is longer, there are a lot more items to find and use in the game. Instead of a game centered around only a couple locations, you'll be running into many more locations where you have to figure out a number of puzzles in order to progress. Sometimes these are fairly straightforward, and other times they require more of the kind of classic video game logic within games like this, like tossing all of your fish that you just bought into a tree. Given the horror nature of the game, you never know when an innocent seeming item is dangerous if you try to use it, or how holding onto a certain item might just save you from certain death later on in certain situations. One aspect of gameplay that was a bit different were puzzles that required reflexes and memory. These took place in two different parts. On the way to Red's treehouse, there are spike traps that you have to get through, and the final boss of the chapter is one giant reflex puzzle. These are puzzles where you would see an attack coming and would either have to dodge before it activated under you or reached you from one of the edges. Like the final boss of the chapter throws knives all over the place. So there's knives coming through the ground underneath you, but then there's also knives being thrown that you have to kind of dodge and get out of the way of. The early spike traps were pretty easy to get past once you knew what was going on. The first time I did it, I just died because I wasn't quite sure what was going on with it. But the final boss fight was really challenging. Only having one hit is pretty brutal and probably isn't the kind of gameplay you would be expecting for a game like this. There is a way to make the final boss a bit easier by getting a few more hit points. I think you can get up to 3, at least that's what I was able to get up to. But it is still a pretty big difficulty spike. While you can skip skip these puzzles? The inclusion of that option begs the question of why include these sections in the first place then. While I could have done without these reflex style puzzles, the rest of Paper Lily is pretty much what I expected and enjoyed from Project Cat and other adventure style games. The art style in Paper Lily is a nice mix of pixel graphics and visual novel style for when people are talking with each other and in some special scenes. If you've played Project Cat, you know what this looks like. This is pretty much the same kind of style that that's going for. I personally really love these styles and the combination of them works well. I feel like with Paper Lily, the pixel art style was able to do a lot more. There are more varied locations, which allow for some weird and wonderful pixel art to go on. Even amid some more standard levels like the forest and facility, there are areas that are just very beautiful to look at or are quite creepy. I also found the sound super enjoyable. The soundtrack is very well done in particular, able to give off anything from kind of happy, cheerful vibes to completely creeptastic to just even kind of the melancholy of the intro theme to Paper Lily. Just a little bit of a mix of cheerful but melancholy in the mix. It just makes for really good music that kind of reflects a lot of the things that are going on in the game and kind of the atmosphere that it's wanting to present. So I just thought it was really well done. It's hard to believe that Paper Lily Chapter 1 is a free-to-play game. It is a pretty well-crafted game considering that, and it took me around 6 hours to get through the game. I did hit a number of the endings in the game, so you can probably zoom through the game in about half the time maybe if you go really fast, or take even longer than I did if you get stuck longer in certain puzzles than I did. Paper Lily is a pretty solid little adventure game that has an intriguing story and decent gameplay. While the story does get a bit frustrating since it leaves you with more questions than answers, and some aspects like the reflex puzzles aren't quite as enjoyable, these things don't really bring the game down that much. Paper Lily feels like it is a passion project for the developers. This does mean that these games take a bit more time to get out than they might otherwise. After all, 3 years did pass between Project Cat and Chapter 1 of Paper Lily being released. However, when you do get these games, they're well put together and enjoyable to play. At least as enjoyable as a game can be, where you might meet your end in a number of creative ways. Ultimately, I'm giving Paper Lily Chapter 1 a 9 out of 10. It's a really good game, and in some ways I am tempted to give it a 10 since it's a free-to-play game and everything like that. However, there just were some uneven parts to the game that I felt brought it down a little bit. It's still very solid and very much worth picking up since it doesn't really cost you a thing to give it a try. While I was a bit surprised that Paper Lily didn't have more of a direct narrative connection to Project Cat, I still found a lot of what I enjoyed in Project Cat within it. Paper Lily Chapter 1 was fun to play, and one of the biggest downsides is that I wish I could play more of the story and figure out what will happen next. But I guess I just have to wait for Paper Lily Chapter 2 like everyone else.